One second, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, at the direction of Chairman Greer, who is not here, I've worked with DEQ and LSO on a number of these issues we've raised, such as the preemption issue and some others. That work is an extensive modification to the bill, probably to the point it would end up being a separate bill. So if the committee has any interest, I would propose to continue working that to resolve a number of these issues that were raised. And I think Senator Rothfuss and I have talked. He had also had an idea on way forward. So that would be my position.
Other comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah. It sounds like there really are extensive revision that we need based on the comments that we heard from DEQ, Representative Burkhart, and kind of concerns with the way this is drafted. I don't think we are in a tremendous hurry with this at this point in time, and we have a budget session coming up that isn't just a budget session, it's a redistricting session, and it's not a session that I think is appropriate for doing a lot of detail work. It'll be challenging to get things introduced. Obviously, this bill would require a 2/3 introduction to be considered. I would be inclined to just leave this on the table for now. I don't think there's anything that's critical that has to be accomplished in this session that we couldn't do better during the next interim, reworking the bill. And I guess I would try and seek input if anyone else on the committee feels otherwise, that we have to get it done. I do think this is important for us to get this right, get the language better crafted, and address the concerns really that the DEQ raised early on about the awkwardness of 21 and 15 and the way that they don't necessarily interact perfectly. So I'd be inclined to table it. If we do find that there's something that has to be done, then I'm more than willing to co-sponsor a small bill draft that maybe is a one item or whatever that small thing is, and try and get it through this session. We've done that plenty of times before. But at this point, to me, this bill is not ready, and I want to make sure that we do a good job with it.
Are there any other comments before I acknowledge the move to table? Hearing none.
Mr.
The
Chairman?
move to table is
Yeah, I was just going to say then, without objection, I'd ask that this bill be tabled.
is there any objection to tabling this bill? No objection. We're going to table 22 LSO 0174. Thank you. Okay. Now we're right on schedule. Industrial siting bill. It's now 11 o'clock somewhere. So do you want to tell us about this? Brian, do you want to tell us about what we have here?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, 22 LSO 84, you should have draft 0.6. This is a bill draft that the committee looked at the meeting in August. It is based on the engrossed version of 2021 Senate File 82 and amends requirements that are related to the local impact assistance payments. And really what this bill does that is different from the version that the committee considered in August is on page, I'll start on page 4. And instead of just simply lowering the impact assistance payment to a lower percentage than 2.76% of the total material costs, it sets up 3 tiers, and that language begins on page 4, line 8. So for facilities with total estimated materials cost of $350 million or less, the maximum percentage would be 2.25%. For projects with material costs between 350 million and 850 million, it would be 2%. And then for anything over $850 million, it would be 1.5%. There's an exception that begins on page 4, line 19, and that's for facilities with total estimated materials costs of 350 million or less. The Industrial Siting Council may increase the maximum percentage to 2.55% if the council includes specific findings that the maximum allowable percentage of 2.25% is insufficient to mitigate the identified impacts. Then on page 5, line 4 is a reporting requirement for the council to report to the Joint Appropriations Committee and this committee if it does raise that maximum allowable rate. And then the only other change, Mr. Chairman, from the previous draft would be on page 7. And this is a reporting requirement for each county, city, and town that receives a distribution, a local impact assistance payment. They must report annually to the Industrial Siting Council describing how that payment has been expended. And those annual reports must continue until all distributions have been expended. And then the remaining parts of the bill draft are just repeated for use taxes. So going on page 11, that's the tiered, the same language. And then again, on page 14 is just the same reporting language for the use taxes. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Brian? Any questions on this bill for Brian? No? All right. I'm sure there's somebody here wanting to talk about this. I have Larson. Is Larson on the no? Oh, okay. How about Representative Heiner? Is he here? Yeah, sure.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Heiner.
thank you for the opportunity to present this bill. As last time we met, we had an opportunity to discuss it. Just to recap some of the high points of that discussion. This was enacted in 1975, so it's been almost 50 years. And there's been a couple of attempts to lower that percentage down from the 2.76. Last session, the Senate passed the bill to lower it down to 2.25, but it was never brought up in the House. The session prior to that, the House passed a bill, and it wasn't and to lower it down to 2, but it was never brought up in the Senate. So both chambers are supportive of this in different years. So the only difference is we put in the amount. Last time we left that amount of reduction open to the committee to decide. It was decided that we should put something in there so that the committee could see the results. We have been working with Mr. Jeremiah Ryman from the County Commissioners Association, and he's been a tremendous help with this. He came up with this 3-tiered idea, which was just a great idea to stage the percentages based on the dollar amount. And we went through a number of spreadsheets and came up with the 2.25 for anything below $350 million, 2.0 for the mid-range, $350 to $850 million, and then 1.5 for a 850 and above. So you're going to hear some public comment, I'm sure, about how this is going to impact our counties and municipalities. But I guess the only way we can ascertain how that will impact them is to do a look back. So if you look back over the past few years, the Industrial Siting Commission has been awarding in the year 2018, they awarded $34.8 million. And this comes right out of our general fund. With these caps that we're proposing in this bill, the 2.25, 2.0, and 1.5, that would have reduced the total amount in 2018 by only $400,000. So less than 1%. So it's kind of a token amount. In 2019, the Industrial Siting Commission awarded $33.9 million. This would have reduced that amount by only $270,000. So 0.07%, very small amount. What we're really doing is just sending a message to our Industrial Siting Council that they need to be a little bit more careful when they look at these mitigated impacts and awarding the money of the state of Wyoming, and vet that a little bit closer. Now, back in August, the LSO put out a white paper for us comparing our procedures versus other states. Hopefully everybody recalls that. They said, let me read that. It says, Wyoming's approach to providing industrial development impact mitigation payments to local governments appears to be unique. We're the only state that does that. Most states provide means whereby the communities can get some assistance from the industry rather than from the state. So at some point in time, maybe we want to revisit the whole Industrial Siting Act and do a rewrite of that, but I'm not ready to do that today. Let's take a small step. What I'm hoping to do is if we lower these maximum amounts, then it will achieve what we're desiring to do, to tighten things up a little bit, and we won't have to rewrite the whole Industrial Siting Act. So with that, Chairman, I will stand for any questions.
Any questions for Representative Heiner? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony. Thanks for coming and being with us. Yeah. Says Jeremiah Ryman might want to talk to us also.
All right.
He's,
Good
there
afternoon,
you
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I appreciate the time to offer a few remarks. Before I give my full remarks and go through the proposed amendment that I've offered to you, I'd like to offer the opportunity, if it is so acceptable, for two of our commissioners to offer some perspective. First, we have Mr. John Espy, who is a Carbon County Commissioner. Carbon County is a county that has often needed this fund, this approach in order to address unmitigated impacts in their county. And then after Commissioner Espy speaks, I've asked Commissioner Pat Wade from Niobrara County to address you as a county that has never benefited from the program, but has been approached by a developer with a rather significant project. And then as I get into my comments, I'll kind of bring back to why I think it is necessary to make at least one of the changes that I propose. So, Mr. Chairman, again, with that, I'd like to ask for Mr. John Espy to be able to offer a few comments.
Mr. Espy, are you on?
Yes,
there?
I am.
And are you ready to? No, there you go.
Yeah, Mr.
Charge
Chairman.
right on ahead.
John Espy, Carbon County Commissioner. Carbon County is, we've kind of been, I guess, the test bed for impact assistance funding and along those lines. But for the smaller projects, I'm nervous about dropping it down below 2.76%. And Jeremiah might get into more of the good details there later. But on these small projects, and something that we've ran into in Carbon County is we don't have you know, a lot of rail facilities and those things for these, the equipment to be offloaded. So the sales tax is being paid in surrounding counties. So the impact assistance that we receive is, in a lot of cases, is all we get. We don't get that other to offset it. The other thing that is tough for us is we get those payments in quarterly payments after the project is started. And a lot of these things, we need that money up front. And so we're on a double deal here where we're not guaranteed sales tax revenue from these projects. And then for a lot of the smaller municipalities, trying to front up some of these impacts without it. So we're always behind the curve on this. And I've worked with Jeremiah. I like the tiered system because I think there has been some, maybe, I don't want to say overpayments, but maybe it hasn't been used as wisely it could have been used. But then again, that's the job of industrial siting. And in the last couple of projects that we've gone through with them, industrial siting has, I think, been doing their job. The council's been doing their job in kicking out things that aren't impacts in those things. So I just want to make sure as we move through this, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. And so I'm just going to go back. I for the smaller projects, I'd still like to be able to have that 2.76%. And I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Espy? Questions? Yes, John Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe, and I could be wrong, but on page 4, it does give you a relief for those smaller projects, such that if if there is not enough money, then they can go up to 2.55. It's kind of a relief valve for the smaller projects that's already written into that. And Jeremiah brought that to our attention, and we tried to put that into the bill to help out in case there is some extenuating circumstances. Are you aware of that part?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And I am aware of it. Where it does get tricky in this is we have so many cooperating, you know, when we do our MOU back to the council, in that we could be playing with 10, 12 different entities on this MOU and trying to massage out all those other little areas. That it would just be, I think it'd be easier if we had the 2.76 and then as we fight to get our MOU together, but then let the council come and be able to work that back out the other way on things that they feel don't belong there. But being able to have that for these smaller projects, and I, like I say, I keep going back to we're not collecting the sales tax revenue on a lot of these projects, so this is important to us.
Other questions? No, thank you, Mr. Espy. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone else? Jeremiah, do you have another commissioner or
Yeah,
is it up
Mr.
to you?
Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have one more commissioner and then I'd like to close it out. The next commissioner that I have for you is Mr. Pat Wade from Niobrara County.
Pat Wade, go ahead and inform us.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as Jeremiah said, this is Pat Wade. I'm chairman of the Niobrara County Commissioners. Jeremiah asked me to provide some information about a green hydrogen project that is currently being proposed in East Central Wyoming, and it has an estimated cost of $2.5 billion. Electrolyzers are utilized to separate hydrogen molecules from the oxygen in water. Process requires a tremendous amount of electrical power, in this case generated by renewable sources, thus making it considered green energy. In addition to the central hydrogen processing facility, the associated wind farm is estimated at 80 to 100,000 acres. And the project it's being represented as needing 500 construction jobs, construction workers, 60 to 100 permanent full-time jobs. The company's hoping to break ground sometime in 2024. And here's some additional information as I think it probably pertains to this discussion. In the 2020 census, it shows Niobrara County is having 2,467 residents. Of these, 1,541 reside in the town of Lusk and 92 in the town of Manville, which is our two population centers, if you will. Niobrara County has a sheriff, undersheriff, and 2 full-time road deputies when fully staffed. Town of Lusk has a chief of police and 4 full-time officers when fully staffed. Manville does not have a police force. EMS and the fire department are both totally manned by volunteers in Niobrara County. And as in many rural communities in Wyoming, we're struggling with our EMS to have crews available. In 2017, a 6th penny specific purpose tax was passed to help fund replacement of obsolete water and sewer mains in both Lusk and Manville. Both towns are working to obtain additional funding at this time to help offset costs. But if no other funding becomes available, it's estimated it will take over 30 years for at current rate of collections to pay that off. So that's a long ways in the future. Niobrara County currently assesses at the maximum 12 mills allowed by statute. So these things severely limits what's available to fund services in the future. As far as housing, the most active realtor in the area normally has between 8 to 10 houses for sale, and currently has 1 house available. And that's due to people moving to this area to escape the craziness of other places, I think. Very few rentals available due to demand from the Wyoming Women's Center workers. And then there are a lot of increased construction workers that are here because of the ongoing Lusk sewer and water projects. So hopefully that gives some information. And I really am not familiar enough with this to be able to comment as to what this bill is trying to do. I'm simply here to show what kind of impact that these projects can have on a community, and especially a very small community. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Questions for Commissioner Wade? Questions for Commissioner Wade? None. All right, Commissioner Wade. Oh, we have one.
I could.
Representative Heiner. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Wade, appreciate your testimony. When this Industrial Siting Act was originally written, it was to support communities and counties with their unmitigated impacts, such as when your first responders have to put in additional overtime to cover during construction season, or additional clearing of the roads of snow during the winter while they're constructing, which, those are unmitigated impacts. As this company comes into your county, Commissioner Wade, do you envision asking them to help with some of the mitigation of those impacts that you can? So if they have to build a new road, do you envision the industry building that road, or the county with the Industrial Siting Commission award?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. we strongly believe in Niobrara County that those who benefit from a project should pay all the expenses possible associated with the project. So we'll be looking at that in every way we can. This is all really new to us. So I'm sure there'll be a big learning curve if it would come to pass. But yeah, we like holding companies accountable in every way we can.
Other questions for Mr. Wade? Commissioner Wade?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Wade, if this bill was to pass in its current form on this project, how much difference would there be in impact payments that the county would get? What would be the cost difference between current and this bill?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to defer to Jeremiah on that. As I said earlier, I really can't speak to what this bill does. We have not had any experience with impact assistance payments in Niobrara County. We're not accustomed to much happening here, so I would appreciate if Jeremiah could help answer that.
Maybe he can answer it when he gets back on. Any other questions for Mr. Wade? Other questions? No, thank you, Mr. Wade. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And back to you, Jeremiah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I will try and come back to that question. It just requires a little bit of quick math here on my part, and I hopefully get to that. Mr. Chairman, I want to first express my appreciation to Representative Larson and Representative Heiner for their collaboration with me to try and understand the impacts, the potential impacts of this change, and to try and address concerns that we all collectively had. And it has been a good dialogue, and we've come closer to a product that I think at least my members might be approaching neutrality relative to. There are, Mr. Chairman, a couple of provisions of this draft legislation that we absolutely support, and in fact have been calling for from the Department of Environmental Quality for a couple of years. One of those provisions is the requirement for the annual report. My members are not opposed to that and have no issue with ensuring that there is transparency in the process. You may remember in August, I provided you with information on Carbon County's use of this fund and the current accounting of their use. We also do not oppose and in fact support the provision adding a definition for unmitigated impacts into the legislation. We have been working with the Industrial Siting Council as they go through their rulemaking process this summer and fall to offer comments and support for them doing that as well, and trying to ensure that there's alignment. So I wanted to make sure that you're aware of our support there. Why the tiers? And this is another place where, yes, we support the tiering approach. It's one that I brought forward. I actually am going to give credit to Commissioner John Espy for originally introducing me to that concept. And so he really deserves that credit. But why the tiers? The notion is, and Commissioner Espy hit on this, that the smaller the project is, and I know when I'm talking small, we're talking about projects in excess of $200+ million. So maybe they're not small in some eyes, but in terms of this program, those are smaller projects. They just don't generate the sales and use tax that larger projects do, and thus there can often be a larger burden, a harder time for communities in order to address the impacts that come forward. But as the project grows, there is more potential revenue coming in, and we think that counties in most instances will be able to address that with a combination of awards through the Industrial Siting Council, as well as the collections that eventually will come in to communities, or at least in most communities. And I'm going to hint on or point to that here in just a few minutes. Mr. Chairman, we do have 3 requests, and that is what is represented in the amendment that I sent to you earlier this week, and that I understand you have a paper copy of in front of you. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to run through each of those in turn, and I'm happy to answer any questions as I go or at the very end. Mr. Chairman, the first request, the first issue for us is both on pages 3 and 10. And this is also the issue that is in some form referenced in the LSO note that you have on pages 7 and 14 of the bill. I have been working with Representative Larson and the Appropriations Committee on Public Works contracting this summer, and part of their approach for those particular issues is to require political subdivisions as well as state agencies to provide their written justification to any public contract works bidder, so that there's some transparency in the system, so they understand why they may or may not have been awarded a project. And so I've modeled this language off of that, and I'm simply asking for you to insert in the bill a requirement of the Industrial Siting Council to inform local governments of how what their justification was for rejecting any of the requests that went before them. The other benefit, I think, of this provision is that it will ensure that local governments are bringing forward projects, requests that are consistent with the approach that the Industrial Siting Council wants to take. The change that I made in this provision from what you see in your staff note from LSO is to put in there, it's only going to be provided if requested by the local government. So I'm not looking for the Industrial Siting Council to go through unnecessary work if the local government feels that they already understand the issue, only asking that if it's requested of the Industrial Siting Council. Mr. Chairman, the second issue presented there is a request to change that 2.55% to back to 2.76% for those projects that are $350 million and less. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to offer you 5 reasons that I think that is an important change. First, the Industrial Siting Council, and Representative Heiner hit on this, they've proven to be capable stewards over the course of the past decade. They've heard your concerns, as well have my members. And so since 2018, the Industrial Siting Council has awarded only 62% of the maximum allowable award, or approximately $48 million less than counties and municipalities were eligible for. Now, there have been instances in the last couple of years in particular where the Industrial Siting Council has felt that it's necessary to go above that 62% threshold, above the 2.25% threshold. And so we're simply asking that they be able to move it up to 2.76. We appreciate the allowance and the relief valve for 2.55, but we do think it needs to go higher. The second reason is that some counties may not realize sales and use taxes associated with the construction costs in their area, even though that development happens there. For example, if construction materials for a Fremont County project are delivered in Natrona County, the company pays its taxes in Natrona County, not Fremont County. In other words, Fremont County will bear the impact of the development, but will be without impact assistance, but without the assistance of the impact assistance program, they will have no additional resources to address the unmitigated impacts from development. And so this is something that you just heard Commissioner Espy talk about. They have had a concern of materials being dropped in Natrona County, and they don't benefit other than once we begin to collect property taxes, which of course takes place much later. The third reason, the difference between 2.55% and 2.76% for projects less than $350 million is only $735,000. You heard Commissioner Espy talk about, in some of their cases, as many as 10 entities are trying to address unmitigated impacts in a community. Let's think about a long linear project like a power line. There are going to be needs that may exceed that 2.55%. And it could be critical to ensuring that we can put in the roads and bridges, the sewer and water systems that are necessary to address that issue. The fourth issue is that the legislation before you is more limiting than past approaches. For example, all three of the tiers are below 2.76%. The first is at 2.25, the second at 2%, the third at 1.5%. And under the first tier, you can agree, or it can go up if the Industrial Siting Council allows that. But we've also put other protections in place to ensure that the Industrial Siting Council is doing its job. We've put in that definition of unmitigated impacts. We've put in the requirement for the annual report. So there are other protections that are here. The other reason that I would suggest that the 2.76% for those 350 million or less is a safe bet is that we now have in here a provision that the Industrial Siting Council is going to have to notify you as members of this committee if they ever do that. And so you're going to understand why they did that. We're going to have a proper check and balance in the system. Mr. Chairman, the last issue it deals with pages 5 and pages 12. It's the third issue on the sheet that I've given you. And I'm simply asking for another relief valve. We have a relief valve in the draft bill for those projects that are $350 million or less. I'm asking for a relief valve for the other two tiers. And the way that I've structured this is such that if the council, the Industrial Siting Council, not just counties, the Industrial Siting Council, if they determine that there is a reason that additional money might be awarded, they can make that recommendation to this committee and to the Appropriations Committee. The design is to give local governments a place, a voice that they can go and talk to their elected officials and ensure that that issue is considered and perhaps funds can be appropriated from whatever fund you may choose to address the unmitigated impacts. We just heard from Commissioner Wade about a $2.4 billion project. And if that ever did come to fruition, they would be in that third tier, that 1.5% tier. They're a county that's never benefited from the industrial siting projects or account. And you've heard the constraints that they have in being able to raise funds and address impact. So it's simply a request to provide a relief valve. I don't see it as anything different than what you have in place for example, the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund with projects that hit a certain threshold having to come to the legislature. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your consideration of the amendments that I've put forward. Again, want to reiterate that there are some good things here. We hope that we can just make it a little bit better and get to a positive spot. Mr. Chairman, quickly to the question that Representative Burkhart asked, my calculations showed that under 2.76% threshold for a project of $2.4 billion, that county or the municipalities within whatever the region might be would be eligible for $66.2 million. By moving it down to 1.5%, they would be eligible for $36 million. Mr. Chairman, with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Jeremiah, for that short description of the thing. Is there any questions for Jeremiah? I think he covered everything we could probably think of. And I was right. You have covered it, Jeremiah. Thank you. Thank you for covering that like you did. So anyone else would like to talk on industrial siding bill draft? Aha.
Mr. Chairman, Justin Schilling from Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Much like the counties, we like many of the parts of this particular bill. I'd like to speak in particular favor to Mr. Reeman's amendment, specifically on the relief valves for the top two tiers. In discussions, obviously this morning there was a lot of talk about Kimmer and that nuclear power development. I think they're a good example, and Representative Heiner and I both were questioning whether or not they would even be eligible for industrial siding with that particular project. But I think they would kind of be the poster children for an extreme circumstance or an extraordinary circumstance where that relief valve would be a good tool for industrial siding to have. When you bring in an industry that the state's never had, and that those communities in that particular neck of the woods probably don't have maybe necessarily the proper EMS or fire equipment to deal with an emergency at a facility like that. They are the reason that industrial siding and these impact payments were created in the first place. So again, our membership would be in favor of that particular amendment. I think we like the tiered system. I think the percentages are close. Again, with those smaller, there is some history on that smallest tier of the council getting to that upper level, to that 2.76. So I think they're, we take the commissioners and the county's point there well, but otherwise that other part of the amendment we're very much in favor of. So with that, I would take any questions.
All right, questions for Wham? Any questions for Justin? Nope. Thank you, Justin. Thank you for being with us today. Thanks for waiting. Yeah, that's good. That's good. You did good. Didn't have to shut you down. Anyone else like to speak on industrial siding bill? Yeah, why does he care?
Mr. Chairman, Luke Esch, I'm the Industrial Siding Administrator for the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. And I am mostly here just to answer questions, but providing a little bit of background, Representative Heiner is correct. The Industrial Siding Act has been around for quite a while, and it's been an evolving process. In the early 80s, it used to be the industrial project proponent used to pay for the impacts to the communities. Due to concerns of that being bad for business, that was modified to a baseline method is what we call it, where it was a look back of the prior 12 months of sales and use taxes for that general area. And once construction commenced, the Department of Revenue would do a calculation of what, if there was an increase above the prior 12 months of sales and use tax in that area. And so any amount above that baseline would be determined the impact assistance payments. And that could be skewed based on various economic factors going on in the industry, whether it was related to the construction of that project or not. And that method persisted for quite a while. It wasn't until I think 2016 that the legislation was changed to the current 2.76% that the model provides now. I have not had a chance to review the amendment proposed by Mr. Riemann. One thing I would offer to the community or to the council or to the committee, excuse me, is just consideration of the council's time. If there's specific findings of fact that it's going to be requested of the council during the hearing, that is going to take additional time. Specifically with the amendment saying that if the specific finding of fact is requested by the local government, at what time is that request going to be made? If it's after the fact, then that could make it very challenging for the council to get together and make those findings. With that, yeah, the department really has no position on this bill. I think we can certainly work with it, and I'll stand for questions.
Any questions? Any questions? Yes. Mr. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ash, please forgive my ignorance on this. I'm kind of confused because the whole point of this is to incorporate the costs of some of those impacts that Representative Hunter talked about, plowing, ambulance services, what have you. If we're trying to identify what those real costs are, why not estimate them, or would it not be logical to estimate them based off for these types of projects? These are the rough ranges that we've incurred for these impact assessments. Why don't we use those actual data going forward versus like, well, we're going to peg it to a percentage or to any of these other vehicles? I mean, is there anyone that you're aware of ever considered actually saying, hey, for this type of project, this type of area, this is what the data shows and what they spend on, impacts X, Y, and Z, basing off real numbers versus anything else? Are you ever any discussion around that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, a couple points on that. One, we've never had the authority to request from the local governments what the impacts or what the money was being spent on. This provision of the annual report that's being incorporated into statute now is the first opportunity for something like that. Two, each community is very different. As the county commissioners indicated, Niobrara County is in very different circumstances than Carbon County. And so to try to say a wind farm in Niobrara County and a wind farm in Carbon County is going to generate the same sort of impacts whenever the impacts are associated with the levels of service that are currently provided for their citizens. So you might have the wind farm coming in Carbon County, which may be better equipped, or Laramie County for that example, for that matter, and Niobrara County, which does not have the equipment associated with potentially fighting a wind turbine fire, whereas maybe Laramie County's already been through that scenario. So it's kind of hard to move projects around the state and associate the same impacts with those communities.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Ash, I want to make sure I caught that correctly. Up until now, we have no idea what the counties have spent that money on historically.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, that is correct.
Mr. Chairman, so
Yeah.
No one has FOIA'd any of the counties for any of this kind of how they're spending any of these funds?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, not to my knowledge. As Jeremiah had indicated, some counties are better at keeping track than others. Jeremiah had provided this committee records from Carbon County at the August meeting of what they had been keeping track of, but it's never been a requirement. And it currently is not a requirement. The department or the division is actually starting to incorporate that condition into the permits on a voluntary basis. But because the permit attaches to the permittee or the applicant, the impact assistance payments comes from the Department of Revenue statutes. So there's really there's no authority of the division over the local governments receiving impact assistance payments.
So, Mr. Chairman, they could be spending this money buying these slow plows or buying popcorn machines for all we know.
Preferably popcorn machines. To answer your question, I was involved with the county back when this all started. And the original proposal was to have the counties report what their costs were. And wow, did that ever stir them up. some counties, like you said, already had all the equipment to do the job with, but they'd invested in it sometime before. Should they be able to put that on their list? It just got really, really bad. And then the smaller counties said they didn't have the manpower to produce all that information. And so it was brought to the percentage that they would get. And then the counties did not want to have to report, including Mr. Western's county did not have to report what they spent it on. So it has a big history of not probing the counties for what they're doing. So this is the best compromise we have in doing this. And we talk about not getting in the weeds. You can talk to your county commissioners and find out what they're doing with it, but that doesn't mean the legislature should be the one probing them for that information. Any other questions for Luke? No, none. All right, thank you. Any other public comment? Any other public comment on industrial siting bill draft we have before us? Is there anybody on Zoom? Nobody in the room, nobody in Zoom. I'll close public comment. And committee, what's your pleasure? Who? Bear moved and Gray seconded. Okay. Any comments on the bill before we go page by page and through this baby? Sure.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I understand the intent of the bill and the problem that it's intending to address, but ironically, Representative Heiner said, unless we want to throw out the entirety of industrial siting and start over, and that would be my plan A, not my plan B. I think that we're at a point where we do need to completely revisit this, rework it, and recognize that we're unique in doing it the way that we do it, and that we don't do it particularly well. I feel like this is, baling wire and bubble gum on an old 80s era, and I guess it's been revised a couple of times, piece of legislation. So I don't know how much effort we want to put into patchwork fixes of it, which is effectively this is trying to make better what we've already got. I would much prefer that we make this our central theme in the next interim and literally just throw it out and start over again and see what we end up with. So that's my inclination, which is a pretty big inclination, but we've taken on some heavy lifts in this committee in the past few years, and I think we put out some pretty good product, and I think it might be time for us to modernize this. And I think about it because these numbers, while well-intentioned and well negotiated, where you've got cut levels, at the end of the day, they are kind of meaningless, because a $1 billion data facility that is a server farm might need less than a $200 million chemical facility that I'm building in terms of impact assistance. And this doesn't really account for the reality that we're not just talking about large scale energy and industrial development at this point in time. We're talking about a lot of other things, which is no fault of this piece of legislation. It's a fault of really the underlying statute. So that's where I'm at. I think that we need to do the heavy lift, and I don't think patchworking is going to help at this point in time as much as just taking on that heavy workload. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's pretty broad suggestion. Any other suggestions? Any other comments, ideas? Representative Gray.
Microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say I support the bill. This has been tried. This is my 5th year in the legislature. I think we're on 3rd or 4th. I'm pretty confident. I think we should raise, get these thresholds a little lower. I think we've seen that there's been some problems, and we can still do this other look, but The problem we're going to have is just what was talked about earlier in the colloquy with Representative Western, which I appreciated, is that they're not, it's going to be difficult to get transparency to the point where we can be confident to tie it to a cost-based model, which I think is part of where you want to go with it. Maybe it's not the only big change, but it's going to be really challenging. And I don't think it's precluded from us taking action now. So I think we should keep going on this. And, you know, I'm pretty confident this is our third or fourth run since I've been here, and there probably were more before that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would echo that same remark. I appreciate what the senator said, and I support him 100%, but I think we need to put our finger in the dike in the meantime. Let's do something right now and then follow up next interim with what Senator Rothfuss is suggesting, maybe look at the whole bill.
Any other comments? No other comments? Let's work the bill then. Page 1, page 2. Page 3, I think there's some suggestions on page 3. If anybody wants to move them.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I move an amendment to incorporate the issue number 1 as proposed by Mr. Raymond.
Moved and seconded to amend page 3 and page 10 as per the county commissioners. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motions to amend, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. That's all on page 3. Page 4, there's a suggestion from the county commissioners also. Does anybody want to do anything on page 4? No? No? Okay. Page 5. Page 5. Does anybody want to do anything on page 5?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would like to propose an amendment as outlined by Mr. Reeman on page 5 and page 12. And let me explain that. If I get a second, I'll explain that a little bit.
Yep. There's a second. Moved and seconded. Go ahead with your explanation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, our relief valve, as we're calling it, for the lower tier, the 350 million or less, provides that the Industrial Siting Council can, if they see a need, increase that up to 2.55. And then they have to follow up with a report to this committee within a certain amount of time. But they have that latitude to make that decision on the spot. This suggested amendment for those larger projects provides that the Industrial Siting Council can recommend to this committee additional monies, but they cannot award it. So ultimately, that relief valve has protection in that this committee will be the ultimate say whether to award that additional money or not. And that's why I support this amendment.
Other discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I do have some concerns with this amendment in that they're now bringing everything to this committee that's over 350 million. And this committee is now set to make decisions on that. That's what we have an Industrial Siting Council for. I think there are some real issues with pushing everything to the legislature. This just being one, that there seems to be an initiative that the legislature makes decisions on everything. So I think I would oppose this amendment.
Other discussion? Other discussion? Any other discussion? The amendment is to adopt issue number 3 from the county commissioners. It's on page 5 and page 12. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, same sign?
No.
Aye. That amendment fails. That's page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. And as it would happen, page 10 is next. 10, then 11, then 12, 13, 14, and 15. All the amendments are in? And if they're all in, we'll have a roll call vote.
Senator Beitman,
Excused.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss,
No.
Senator Wasserberger,
Excused.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
No.
Representative Duncan, Representative
strong.
Air,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
Aye.
Representative Heiner,
Aye.
Representative Sherwood, Representative Western,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Greer,
Excused.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
seven ayes. So that passes.
7-4, and that bill passes. The committee will go on to the legislature. Next up on our agenda is lunch. We're going to skip lunch. Yeah, we're going to skip that. And we'll move right on to 1:15, Wyoming Business Council. Yeah, we're right on schedule.
I think we're catching up.
Yeah, we're catching. We're catching up, and Josh is going to help us catch up. Josh and Ron and everybody's they're gonna, hey, this is really fun. You guys don't all leave. This is really fun stuff. Jeez, they'll walk out like we're done. Okay, Josh, you want to carry on?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee, for having us today. We are here to talk a little bit about three pieces of legislation, two of which the second two are ones that we can definitely walk through. I believe the first one has been brought forth, and we could speak to that if you want. Before we dive into that, if I might just make sure that everyone had a chance. We've sent some information that ties into the questions that we had back in, gosh, I guess it was maybe August or September, some questions that we had about some of the BRC programs. And so we have provided some of that information to LSO and to this committee. Hopefully you've had a chance to review that. We're obviously open for questions anytime around that, but I think in the interest of time and also to stay focused on these pieces of legislation, we could dive right into that, sir. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think in this case, there was a bit of confusion in the last meeting around this as well. This is the 22 LSO 0083 working draft 0.6. This isn't necessarily our legislation, but we'd be happy to answer any questions on it if there are some.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, you should have draft 0.6. This is a bill that the committee looked at in August, and there are some revisions to this version. And what this bill does would require the Business Council to promulgate rules to recapture funds associated with grants and to set interest rates for grants, for loans at a certain rate. This is largely based on a bill that the Management Audit Committee looked at in the 2019 interim. So on page 2, line 5, this would amend current 912-601 to say that grants and loans that are made under this program are subject to the following conditions. So first, grants are matching grants, and it strikes language that says that loans shall be made at no or low interest rates. The new language on line 12 is the minimum interest rates, the prevailing United States Treasury rate for bonds of comparable maturity. Line 17, grants for revenue generating projects must provide for repayment of the grant funds in accordance with the following. And first on line 21, this is slightly different from based on committee discussion from the August version, but the revenue recapture percentage shall be 50% of the project cost covered by the grant, except that the council may award to the grant recipient a discount of not more than 25% of the project cost if the recipient satisfies criteria that are established by council rule. And those rules must include, now I'm on page 3, line 7, consideration of whether the grant recipient has utilized or leveraged other economic development tools and the level of support from the city, town, or county that's seeking the grant. Page 3, line 15 provides that the amount of revenue recaptured may exceed the amount of the original grant. And then line 18, revenue that's generated by the project may be recaptured for the full expected life of the revenue generating project. Moving on to page 4, this covers the situation if a project that's covered by a grant or a loan in whole or in part, if that project is sold, assigned, or transferred, then all revenues that are generated by the sale shall be utilized to retire the project loan if a loan was issued. And after the loan is paid in full, or if a grant was used, a percentage of revenues that are generated by the sale, assignment, or transfer, not less than the percentage of the project cost that's covered by the grant or the loan, shall be remitted to the business council and deposited in the business ready community account. On page 5, line 2 is just a conforming amendment. Then section 2, this would only be prospective, so it would apply to grants and loans that are issued on and after the effective date of the section. Section 3 is rulemaking, and then section 4 is a split effective date. The rulemaking would be immediate. The remainder of the bill would be July 1, 2022. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions? Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, I know we've got a 3-year history on this one, but can you just remind me on what is the current rule on revenue recapture? Because that was one of the amendments at the last meeting. So because originally it said that it was for the percentage contribution of the state. So just remind me what it is in rule.
Mr. Chairman, it's not in statute, so I defer to the business council, but I believe the rule is currently 25% is the current recapture rate as set by council rule. But I'll let the business council correct me if I misstated that.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, 25%.
Any other questions for Mr. Fuller? I have a question there on that page 3, B, the amount of revenue recaptured may exceed the amount of the original grant. How does that work? How could it exceed the amount of the original grant?
Yep, Mr. Chairman. That's a good question. My recollection, this language was included, I believe, in the earlier version of the bill. And I think this was one of the recommendations in that management audit that would permit this. In terms of how this may be possible practically, I would defer to the business council to answer that.
Okay, business council?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and this is probably it's probably a bit of a long shot that it would happen, but ultimately, because there are no limits on the percentages proposed in this amendment, those percentages, if the project was sold at a much greater value than the original construction or the original grant, then because it could be up to 50% of that it is possible that the recapture could actually be greater than the grant originally, if there was a lot of appreciation of that asset, for example. So imagine if it went to 3 times its original value, 50% of that, the net proceeds or the net sale would be 150% of the grant. Does that make sense?
All right, thank you. Yeah, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the management audit report that came out in 2016, which was the year before I got there, but a management audit, we did a final review in 2018 and we implemented those recommendations, and we're still trying to get them through. And keep in mind, this was a 150-page report. It was at a time when when we still did these huge program evaluations. So LSO 3-4 staff members probably spent 5 to 6 months on this report, and they were finding 2 situations that this was addressing in tandem with a couple other provisions. One was the one that Mr. Durrell just brought up, which is that many, certain people, certain projects, they were using the state investment to flip an asset, and then the state wasn't recovering really a huge portion of that over revenue recapture. So they were basically using our funds as investment and flipping the asset, and not returning hardly anything. So that was the first thing they were trying to address in that. The second is the time value of money, which is particularly prevalent now that we're in this hyperinflationary sphere that is probably going to continue, which is that, you know, we should be able to recover the project grant plus inflation. And so that's the other thing that the report talked about, is the need to consider the time value of money.
Thank you, Representative Gray. Was there a question in there?
No, I was just trying to respond to Senator Anderson's question.
Okay,
Thank you.
Any other questions to Wyoming Business Council? No? I guess continue on the bill.
Yep. So Madam Co-Chair, again, I think we could stand for questions. Any other questions on this, and in terms of the way it might be implemented? In terms of implementation and creating rules, we already have revenue recapture in the rules, and we would be happy to do that if this legislation passes. That can be executed, I suppose.
Okay, any questions?
Madam
ahead.
Chairman, excuse me. Yeah, on this, one of the concerns I have and have had for recapture, and I definitely understand the desire not to lead to the scenario that Representative Gray discusses, but the unintended incentives of recapture are don't do anything dynamic. If you bought a building, keep the building, even if it's not a good investment. And I don't know at what point that actually starts to kick in. And I was wondering if you've had any conversations or done any analysis. We're at a 25% recapture right now. I think that's relatively new, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like I was in the legislature when we implemented that. I think I was against it at that point in time. How do these discussions play out? And at what point is a recapture not going to disincentivize thoughtful economic development?
Josh?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Senator Rothfuss, I think that's a valid question. So this went into effect, I believe, in 2016.
Yeah, that
is
sounds right.
when that this recapture went into effect. I don't know if we have enough data, and we haven't analyzed it from that perspective that you mentioned to really make a decision on that.
Okay. And Madam Chairman, a different question, if I can.
Go ahead.
One of the things that we don't look at now, it's not in here, but it's something that might be a viable alternative that gets at the same interests that are expressed, but we haven't pursued, is the idea of trying to have equity investments in businesses or in facilities, as opposed to kind of how we do things now, grant loan. There are constitutional concerns with that, but I don't think it's a constitutional impossibility. We've done legislatively direct investments, and we've done a lot of things in the space before where we typically have to ensure that the state is compliant with 16.6 and then receives due compensation and all of the other provisions. Do you see that as an attractive concept for us to potentially pursue? And would that be an alternative way to address a problem like this?
Josh?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair and Senator Rothfuss. That's an interesting concept indeed. I think the idea of being able to take some equity and to do that is one thing. So there's as you mentioned, 16.6 considerations and having adequate consideration. There's the other element of it, of having a government entity on your cap table as a business. And I think that's something that we need to understand as well. Because we haven't been in these situations, we can't really say that that's an attractive thing for a business or not. And so taking equity is, it's something that we haven't done. So we haven't asked the question as much as we could. So again, I can't really give you an informed decision on that.
Madam Chairman, I'll just say anecdotally, I've talked to a number of companies recently that are working projects in Wyoming and want to work projects in Wyoming. And it is a dream of theirs to have Wyoming take an equity stake in it. To be quite honest, they would love that as an opportunity. So I hope we will take a look at that and pursue that as an option, but it'll take some work to get there.
Anyone else? No one? Okay, I guess you're off the hook. Pretty easy. Anyone else wish to testify on, we're on 83. Don't all rush the podium at once.
And you guys can stay nearby probably, yeah.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Lisa Johnson, representing the Wyoming Economic Development Association. And we just wanted to briefly express our, we're not in favor of this bill. We think the Business Ready Community Grant and Loan Program has the rules in effect to be administered effectively by the Wyoming Business Council. The Business Ready Community Program has benefited communities across the state. And I guess just without going into a lot more detail, we just are opposed to this bill.
Any questions? Committee? Nothing? Okay. Guess you got off easy too. Anyone else? Boy, you guys are tired, I think. All right. Committee, any more public testimony? I don't see anyone online either. So no other public testimony. I guess I'll close public testimony for this bill. Do we want to work all of these individually and then, okay. So I'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? It's been moved by a multitude. Let's see. I will pick Gray and seconded by Bear. All right. It's been moved and seconded. Sorry, it's a long day. Any amendments or do you want to work it page by page? What's your pleasure? Let's all jump in at once. Okay, Representative Sherwood.
Oh, good. Okay, Madam Chair, thank you. Before we go page by page, I guess I just want to give everybody a heads up. I probably have an amendment or issue or challenge on every page of this document. So just to be transparent as we move into this, I'm very uncomfortable where this bill is at. I don't think we have the time or attention and resources we need to polish it and send it out into the world. So just wanted to be transparent about where I'm at.
Anyone else? Further discussions? Yes, no? Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, we've been talking about this for years, and as I alluded to, I absolutely agree with the idea that we want to try and address the concerns that are raised, that this is trying to address. I just don't think this does it. I think this provides inappropriate incentives. It means that I should be holding capital instead of liquidating capital and transacting. Wow, we would just have a circumstance if we pass this where if somehow you were able to get a BRC grant, you would simply buy an asset and you would hold that asset and you would never change and you would never be dynamic. The last thing we want as part of our economic development structure is an incentive to fail to be dynamic, which is what I see this legislation as drafted as. And again, I'm not averse to the idea of trying to find ways to effectively profit share and make sure that we're cycling the money. This does the opposite of cycling the money. What we would like to do with our economic development is generate revenue and then try and spread that revenue around. I think this does exactly the opposite. So I'm concerned, and I don't see any quick fixes. If I saw any quick fixes, I would simply amend to it. I think this is a scrap, think about and do later.
Madam Chairman, are we going to amend first? Because I'd like to make some comments, but I'd wait till the end. Are we going to do amendments or is this our shot to talk about the bill.
Go ahead and talk about it because it sounds like there's some pretty extensive amendments coming. So go ahead and
Okay.
talk about it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. This came out of a management audit study. There's hundreds of hours of taxpayer funds spent on this. So you got to keep in mind, all of these recommendations came out of that study in 2016. So it's not ideological. This came out of an extensive study by the LSO itself. So I guess one thing I would say here is I'm a little perplexed on the last speaker's comments because, earlier he was saying that we should explore taking an equity stake, which I think I would just from a low government perspective and the constitutional problems, I think that is very, it's sort of taking an axe at a problem. This is sort of a middle ground. It's saying, look, this is an investment. These grants and loans are an investment. There's a couple things in here. One, the interest rate is going to match at least a treasury rate. Okay, that's pretty low standard for this sort of high risk deal. Two, it's not going to allow entities to flip an asset that the state is invested in and take the profits off that asset. Because right now, the way the rules read, they can do that. And the study talked about that. Now, look, if they fix that by rule, they said that 2 years ago when we brought this bill. And they've had the opportunity to fix that since then. It hasn't happened. I certainly think in the coming 5 months, or the coming month or two, they have the ability to fix that issue. They had the ability to fix it at the Laramie meeting, which was 4 months ago, to initiate that process. So I'm just not confident it's going to happen over rule. And so that was one of the things that the study showed, was that you want to stop those instances of an asset being flipped and then a rule not allowing revenue recapture off an asset that is sold. And keep in mind the compromise that we made in the last meeting, which is that originally this bill, what it said is that the revenue recapture would match the percentage of the product cost of the project cost that the state was putting in, which seems pretty equitable to me. If the state's putting in 60% of the project costs, they should get 60% of the revenue recapture. With an amendment, and yeah, I voted against it, but it's a compromise. We lowered that to 50%, between 25 to 50%. And right now the rule is at 25%. So I just think that these are pretty basic concepts. And at some point we have to face the fact that this can't just be funny money. I mean, there has to be some accountability beyond 25% in revenue recapture. And we can't just allow entities to flip an asset and take advantage of the taxpayers of our state. So that's what we're trying to do here. And I'd encourage an aye vote. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so I guess we want to move on to amendments. Okay, go ahead. Do you want to jump page by page, or do you just want to jump straight into your the page of your amendment? I think Representative
Second, now do it.
Okay, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. Are all yours on page 5? Oh, it's the whole bill.
Madam Chair, like I mentioned, I know you and I and Chairman Greer were on sort of a subcommittee working group to try to, get this to a place that would be palatable in terms of wisely investing the state's funds, supporting local economic development, making sure the communities had resources to reinvest. This idea of flipping an asset, it doesn't become funny money. It goes into the next economic development project, right? So we're kind of losing sight of why this program exists. And so again, like, as I said, the way that this is presented today, I can't support it. I'm not for the revenue recapture percentage because I want those funds to stay in the community and go on to the next project at the local level. I think that it's really problematic when you think about the amount of revenue recapture can exceed the original grant, that the life expectancy of the project goes on indefinitely. I think that's a nightmare for reporting, and it feels a lot like government overreach. In terms of, paying a staff member with the business council to track a project indefinitely. Like, I don't see an end in sight for that. So I think these changes that are proposed currently in here make this tool a tool that will sit in the toolbox unused. And I've heard from many members of local economic development organizations that, as stated by WIDA, that they can't support this. I don't even know where to start.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I think if the predicate is what Representative Sherwood said, you would support the bill. If you want this to go back into the communities, you would want revenue recapture, because that goes back to the business council to then redistribute. So right now what's happening in the management audit study, this isn't me, this is an LSO management audit study, said that assets are being flipped and they are not providing revenue recapture, which means it's not going back to the business council to redistribute. It's going into an individual's pocket. Okay. And so they're taking advantage of the taxpayers of our state. So if we want to have that money come back to the business council and continue to have those investments and not just have the situation where an individual is going to pocket those funds, that's what that provision's about. So that's what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
So just 1 second. I'm going to step in and give my opinion, even though I'm sitting in as co-chair right now. Sorry. In my community, we have a very robust economic development group, and we don't use this because it doesn't work the way it is, and it's too difficult. And so what we do is the way the bill's written, they would figure out a way to circumvent and not use this program. The way it's written, it is into perpetuity. You'd be paying it forever. So the way it's written, it doesn't work. They would find other ways to use it. They would do loans, they would do other things instead of using this program. It does not go back to an individual. It goes back and reinvest into the next project, into the community. When we, this summer, when we were in Sheridan, we toured different programs and project sites where they purchased a location. And then once that location was done and the funds from that project and that location reinvested to another project. And so that's what happens is those funds roll, as they receive those funds, they roll over into another project. So they reinvest into other projects within those communities. That's how this intends to work. But the way it's been rewritten, the intention of this was for us to have those, we have this much money, a bucket of money. And the intention was the more sophisticated your program or your area is, you would receive less percentage or less funds. And the less sophisticated your program is, you would receive more access and funds, so that money would be spread out a little bit more fairly across the state. That was the intention of what we were going after in this, and we just didn't get there. We need more time. So that was the intention behind this, and it didn't get there. I'll get to you after Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I was just going to ask, because I do think it's important to be clear. If I were someone sitting out listening and I thought that an individual was going to receive state funds as a result of selling a business that was purchased under the Business Ready Community Grant program, I would be very concerned also. That would be disconcerting. So I'd ask Representative Gray to maybe be a little bit more clear on what you mean by an individual is receiving money off of this flip, because there's nothing statutorily or anything that's wildly constitutional that would allow any of these funds to end up in private hands. In fact, we have to bend over backwards to use these funds in an appropriate way, even when it doesn't seem like the most straightforward and logical. We do things like infrastructure and roads and storm sewer and electrical grid and all of the infrastructure that surrounds a project so that we can ensure that we're actually complying with 16.6 of the Constitution. So when the good representative responds, I'd appreciate more clarity on what he means by an individual receives this compensation.
Representative Gray.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going through the report here to talk about these instances from 2016 that LSO identified. If you give me a moment, I can find it. Well, it's a 100-page report, so I maybe in a moment, if we go back, keep going back and forth, I'll keep looking forward in the next person's opportunity, Madam Chairman. But I want to respond to a couple of those points. So, for one, the way this is drafted right now, it says it may go the full life of the project, not shall. So the difference between shall and may is that it provides that discretion. So it isn't necessarily going to go. If it said shall, then yes, it could go on in perpetuity. But what the study identified is that there are instances when you have an appropriate lifespan where you would go beyond what is currently done in rule. And so that's why you have the may instead of the shall. So I wanted to respond to that point. It is a may, not a shall. The second point that I think is important to respond to is that what happens when you have a sale of an asset, and the study talked about this, is that they can get around the revenue recapture. And in that instance, there is no revenue recapture. So there is no funds taken back by the state to revolve into other projects. So it's not going to be split it's not going to be placed back into the community. It's going to be placed in an individual's pocket. That's what we were trying to get to with this statute. And, you know, I understand some may not agree with this, but I would appreciate if we could interact with what the statute actually says. And if you don't agree, you don't agree, but let's interact with what it says. And that's what it's trying to say. Thank you.
Brian, do you have that statute available, or could you pull that in and help us out here?
Madam Chairman, the statute for the grants or
That Representative Gray is referring to, just so that we can all be on the same page.
yeah, Madam Chairman, Representative Gray, if you could point me in maybe a direction?
What's the question?
Just repeat what you said in terms of what statute you were referring to.
Well, I said first it's a may, not a shall. And then I said that what we're trying to do is to make sure that in the event of a sale of an asset, that revenue recapture occurs, so that is retained by the state to use for other projects, not in an individual's pocket. And so I don't know what your question was off my comments. I didn't understand that.
So Madam Chairman, I'm not sure there is a current statute that's in this bill draft. That's on page 3, lines 15 and 16, I believe is what Representative Gray was referring to.
I apologize. I thought he was referring to a previous statute is what he was referring to. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for the Business Council. In the current rules that talk about the revenue recapture, please clarify for us whether that is 25% off of net revenue and/or is that also 25% if the asset is sold? Thank you.
Go ahead.
So it is 25% of the net revenue and or 25% of the grant amount, depending on the sale price. I think it's also important to note that these are funds that are for publicly owned assets. They are not privately owned assets. And so it would be a municipality, a county, or a joint powers board who would be flipping that asset. And that, so I think it's important to note that BRC does not provide information, or excuse me, investments in individuals or privately owned assets. These are publicly owned assets. And so all of the money, and this is detailed in the video I provided, all of the money stays within a municipality, county, or the state with the sale of that asset. I think that is important to note. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, so could you address the statement that this is addressing the individual that gets rich off this program? If we're just set up with municipalities and that kind of stuff, how does the individual prosper from this?
Mr. Giroux.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Senator Anderson or Chairman Anderson, there, in the way that the BRC statute is written, the individual does not benefit from the sale of that asset. The municipality and the state, utilizing revenue recapture that is laid out in rule today, benefits. So if a municipality were to flip an asset, the municipality would have that money for further economic development interest. They would be able to utilize those funds, also defined in rule, and how they can use those funds for economic development activities. So ultimately, the money that is generated from a BRC project that sells is captured within the municipality and the state, or as I like to say it, in the family.
Okay, moving on. Do we have any other amendments or anything else? Representative Gray, did you want to do any amendments? No, I think. Okay, question being called. This would be a roll call vote.
Senator Beitman. Senator Cooper.
No.
Senator Rothfuss.
No.
Senator Wasserberger.
Excuse.
Representative Bear.
Aye.
Representative Burkhart.
Aye.
Representative Duncan.
No.
Representative Air.
No.
Representative Gray.
Aye.
Representative Heiner.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood.
No.
Representative Western.
No.
Co-Chairman Greer.
Excuse.
Chairman Anderson.
No.
That fails.
Okay, do you want us to, Josh, to bring us into 22 LSO 90.8?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to turn it over to Josh Keefe, who has been working on this legislation to talk through that. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Chairman, fellow members of the Minerals Committee, Josh Keefe, Economic Development Finance Manager with the Wyoming Business Council. I'll try to go fairly quickly. As Director Durrell just said, we've been working on this bill for quite some time. There are a couple of modifications to existing loan participation programs. Keep in mind, just to refresh your memory, these are loans that are done in conjunction with financial institutions around the state to do projects in various communities, various industries, whatever that might be. And so what is in this bill is essentially the ability to increase our amount of participation, as well as change some of the messaging. A bridge loan, for example, in the banking world typically indicates a loan that's less than 12 months. I understand kind of what the original perhaps intention was when that loan program was created, but I'm looking to change it to a 50-50 program so that we can better communicate and make it easier to do deals with our partners at the banks. Also included in this is 2 new products. One is the succession financing program. This would allow businesses to help pass down ownership from one owner to another. Essentially, what that usually happens is that there is some kind of, in the finance world, where we call it blue sky, where there may be a loan that's made that's not totally collateralized. And it's very difficult for financial institutions to help finance these. And my intention with this was to try and kind of cover that gap and to try and help keep small businesses on Main Street. And that this would allow that to happen, continuing our relationship with the financial institutions that we have. Also, the second product is contract lending. This one's probably not as popular as the succession. However, there is some need sometimes to have the ability to help a business perhaps buy some raw materials to fulfill a contract that they have. I did put parameters in there in regards to the maximum amount of the loan that those would be, as well as how much of the loan portfolio would be dedicated to those types of loans. Keep in mind, typically those contract loans would be, I'd say more than likely less than 2 years, and would be quick turnarounds where the state would get paid back in conjunction with the business that was completing the contract. Another vital part of that is to prevent any kind of perception of competing with the local financial institutions. We'd require 2 denial letters from a financial institution saying that they would not be able to do that type of financing. The loan would still be underwritten, just like I do the other ones, to make sure that we would be able to get paid back as planned with that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions in regards to LSO 90.
Questions for LSO 90? Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. One question I had last time, and I don't know that we've come up with a solution to address it, is a circumstance where the requirement of the 2 loan denials kind of assumes that the loan terms and conditions are reasonable, where I could have an acceptance of a loan that is not a reasonable set of loan terms and conditions that the company would want to pursue. And it sort of gets that individual caught in a bit of a catch-22, I think, based on the way that this is drafted. Is that something that was thought through? Is that something we should be concerned about? Any thoughts?
Chairman Anderson, Senator Rothfuss, when it comes to that, I think typically, based upon my past experience, that was something that, quite frankly, just not many financial institutions really offer, because there really is no hard asset to collateralize the loan with. And so my goal would be, I don't think we're competing with the financial institution. I don't think we're taking any business away from them. I think the customer would still keep their deposit accounts and those types of things, that relationship with the local bank. And so I've thought about that some, but again, I don't think it'll be a common occurrence. I think we do get requests every now and then for this type of product.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, Representative Bear.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to follow up with that last question. It's been my experience that banks will look at an appraisal, a business appraisal, but will disregard the blue sky portion of that appraisal. Would you say that's a correct assessment of what you're describing here?
Chairman Anderson, Representative Bear, yes, I think a lot of times when it comes to passing down a business or trying to sell a business, it is difficult for the financial institution to collateralize, and that business valuation, more often than not, has that blue sky component, because there is some value in, for example, having an existing book of business, if you will, that adds value to the business and allows that cash flow stream to keep going.
Follow up.
And I think you gave testimony in previous meetings that that particular ongoing part of the business is completely lost if this type of a financial opportunity isn't provided. Would that be accurate?
Chairman Anderson, Representative Bear, yes, sir. I think that we've seen it happen before. I've heard from economic developers as well as bankers and fellow business people that say, gosh, I wish we could have been able to help, but we just legally can't, or whatever it might be. And so that was my goal with this legislation, was to try and help fill that gap. And like I said, keep businesses on Main Street and in small communities going. So.
Other questions? Other questions? Other questions on LSO 90.8? Thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony. Is there any other public comment on LSO 90.8? Partnership Challenge Loan Program. Partnership Challenge Loan Program. Is there anybody on the Zoom? Nobody in the room and nobody on the Zoom. We'll close public comment on LSO 90.8. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Cooper. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Let's work this page by page. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9. Oh, yep, page 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 9, I still have concern about this 2 letters from financial institutions denying an application of request for financing. I wanted to put in some reasonability standard, which would then be interpreted by the business council for reasonableness. And so I would just like to, I'll move to amend to insert on page 9, line 8, after the 4 at the end of the line, reasonable. And I'd welcome any better language suggestions, but institutions denying an application or request for reasonable financing. And that would just leave it up to the business council to decide what is reasonable financing. I expect it all sort itself out, but I just want to make sure that that's going to work out. I also a little curious if you're maybe in a small town and where you get your second denial, you have to travel someplace else just to get a denial. It's a little bit awkward, but I guess we'll let that one play out. So we'll go with a motion to insert reasonable after line 8 on page 9.
Is there a second for that amendment? Seconded by Duncan. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Question? All in favor of reasonable on line 8, page 9, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That motion, that amendment carries. Page 9, page 10. Page 11. And as it happens, page 12 is next. And page 13. That's it. That's all, folks. We got the question. Can we call a roll call, please?
Senator Beitman,
Excused.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger,
Excused.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
Aye.
Representative Duncan,
Aye.
Representative Air,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
No.
Representative Heiner,
Aye.
Representative Sherwood, Representative Western,
Excused.
Co-Chairman Greer,
Excused.
Chairman Anderson.
Sure, she shuts me off. Aye.
That passes.
Go ahead with number 3.
Thank you, Chairman Anderson. Again, I'm going to turn it over to Josh Keefe with this. It's easy.
Chairman Anderson, members of the Minerals Committee, LSO 91.5 is a amendment to include electric vehicle and hydrogen fueling stations. This program originally started out as the natural gas infrastructure fueling loan program. And so when we, I think, initially talked about this, gosh, I think it was back in June, the recommendation was to include hydrogen and charging stations for EVs. And so with that, it really is, I think, a fairly straightforward bill. It just expands the scope just from a CNG station to include those other 2 types of vehicles as well, both hydrogen and electric. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Josh? All kinds of them. Heiner first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Keefe, there was a lot of emphasis on natural gas fueling stations in a few years past, but I haven't seen many being built lately. Are we still building stations for natural gas, or is that kind of ebbed and slowed down now?
Chairman Anderson, Representative Heiner, I guess I'll just keep my scope of the answer to what I know. The ones that I know about, so we did complete 1 natural gas station utilizing this program in Afton. I know that there is another CNG station in both Jackson and Cheyenne as well. However, I have not heard of any more CNG stations being built that I'm aware of. And I, again, I don't want to presume things, but I'm assuming that's market forces causing that.
Representative Beer.
Asked and answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Just to briefly comment on that, I was a part of the Minerals Committee when we put that this legislation together, originally trying to incentivize it. And this was a case where there was really us trying to push to create this and trying to provide incentives that would lead to development of natural gas stations. And you can see that we weren't all that incredibly successful, which is regrettable. In this case, there's a clear market demand, I think, that is pulling. And so hopefully this one will actually be more successful. But again, it's a tool. It was used a little bit in its previous incarnation. Hopefully it'll be used more in this other one.
I have a question. The federal government is putting up a lot of money for charging stations. Would this fit with them, or would we be part of that, or how would that all work, since they're looks like their infrastructure bill is going to fund this mostly across the U.S.
Chairman Anderson, I believe that it would work in conjunction with that, although I'll be honest, I have not read all of the parameters when it comes to the federal funding for hydrogen types of fueling stations and EVs.
Other questions? Other questions? No other questions for Josh? All right, Josh, thank you. Is there any public comments in the room or on Zoom? No Zoom? No room? All right, we'll close public comment, and what's your pleasure? Duncan moves. Second? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Oh, seconded. It is seconded by Rothfuss, yes. Any discussion, or you want to work it page by page? No discussion. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. End. Let's have a roll call vote on this. I like these roll call votes.
Senator Bateman,
Excused.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss. Senator Wasserberger,
Excused.
Representative Bear,
No.
Representative Burkhart,
No.
Representative Duncan, Representative Air,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
No.
Representative Heiner,
No.
Representative Sherwood. Representative Western,
Still excused.
Co-Chairman Greer,
Excused.
Chairman Anderson.
No. The
That
drama.
failed.
Huh?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it was 5 aye, 5 no, or 4 excused, so that fails by an equal. vote.
Oh. So, but one vote does matter, doesn't it? Yes. That should clear up your bills. Anything else to come for Business Council?
Mr. Chairman, no, that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. One guy had it pretty easy there. All right, next, we're right up there, right close, 315, electric charging stations regulation should be the next one in your, boy, we just keep losing audience. Boy, everybody thinks we're not going to argue about these. Okay, electric charging stations. Mr. Fuller, you want to give us a little rundown on this one?
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, this is a draft that you and Chairman Greer directed LSO to prepare for this meeting. What this bill draft does is that it specifies that the retail sale of electricity for charging electric vehicles is not subject to regulation as a public utility. And that's, if you look at the bill on page 2, lines 16 to 18, that's the language that goes into the definition of public utility in Title 37, which concerns the public utility statutes. This would be effective immediately. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
So, Mr. Fuller, this is just for charging electric vehicles. This isn't the hydrogen or any of the others. This is just the electric because that was what would come under the PSC.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The change in this bill draft would only contemplate the retail sale of electricity for charging electric vehicles.
Okay, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, I know you're just drafting what was intended, but I know you know this. I'm a simple man. I mean, what's the problem we're trying to address here? I forgot. Like, what's the implications of this? I mean, I understand what that means, that it's not going to be subject to regulation, but what was the problem we're trying to address here?
Mr. Chairman, for that, I defer to Mr. Burbridge.
He has a good answer.
I think he has a good answer. The problem we were seeing was that this charging station could come under the PSC, and we weren't intending for it to come under the PSC. So we wanted to have some way to say that these charging stations do not become a utility unto themselves. They are part of a utility, but they're not a utility themselves. But I'll let Mr. Burbridge answer that. Mr. Burbridge, could you give us some background on that?
Chairman Anderson, John Burbridge, Chief Counsel, Public Service Commission. The background on this is we have been noticing and have actually received questions about whether or not these charging stations would fall under our jurisdiction under the definition of a public utility relating to electric utilities specifically. We do know that part of the conversations we've had with people on this is that there have been attempts to remove themselves from jurisdiction by saying that they are renting a space and the people are paying for rent when they're charging a vehicle. We feel that's a little disingenuous, and we feel that
technically having a charging station and charging customers to charge their vehicles at those stations falls under the current definition where it discusses the sale or provision or providing of electric, the electric commodity. This is similar to, in matter of fact, the last bill was a nice segue into this one. This is similar to the natural gas situation where we did seek where an exemption was given. It's important, I think, also to realize, as this was mentioned in the last bill, there is federal money available right now, approximately, from my understanding, $5 million a year for 5 years to develop the infrastructure to support and put in EV charging stations along the major corridors in Wyoming, which would be I-25, I-90, and I-80. And it's a possibility that those people that put in RFPs for those projects, once they get to that point, would in fact, under the situation to sell that electricity, would fall under that definition and then would have to come to us for a CPCN and then follow all of our requirements for annual reporting and such. And it seems that under the circumstance, two things that would potentially get in the way and slow down the ability to develop the EV charging stations on those corridors. And that, I know I said two things and now I lost the second, so I'll stop there. Thank you. I stand for questions. Any questions for Mr. Burbridge? Yes. No, you can't have a microphone. I don't know.
It does work.
I don't know.
Mr. Burbridge, correct me if I'm wrong, but sales tax is paid on the sale of electricity, is it not?
Chairman Anderson, Representative Burkhart. I know there are taxes for the sale of electricity, whether it's sales tax. Not being a tax expert and without having a line item bill in front of me, I hesitate to say that, yeah, there's sales tax on the bill, but there are other associated taxes with electricity. But I'm not able right now to specifically answer the tax aspect of an AV charging station.
Follow up then. Okay, just a minute, go ahead.
Well, typical utility service is subject to sales tax. Over there are exemptions for resale, quantities for resale, industrial sales, agricultural sales. Some tax exempt organizations, of course, but your typical utility service is subject to sales tax.
So, okay, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Burbridge, if you know, and I understand the position you're in. So a company sets up and has an electric vehicle charging station. And then they sell that electricity, the charge, to someone with a vehicle. At what point are those taxes paid? Are they paid twice? At each, the person who resells it pays it, plus the purchaser pays it, or is it only paid once? More of a curiosity question than anything.
Chairman Anderson, Representative Burkhart, I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure, but if the person offering the electricity is buying that from the utility and paying a tax at that point, then the person that would be purchasing the electricity for recharging their vehicle would potentially be paying a sales tax at that. So I suspect there would be two taxes there in that instance. Yes.
Thank you.
I'd like to answer that a little bit more. One of the first guys that built charging stations allowed years free charging, and the auto owner did not pay taxes. So I'm assuming that person, that entity, paid the taxes to the utility. Now, of course, the end game is that the guy paying for the charge pays it, but he pays it in a fee. He doesn't pay it as a sales tax. He just pays a fee, and that the taxes are included in that for the utility, as the way I understand it. Go ahead.
Chairman Anderson, yeah, yes, that is how I would understand it as well.
Okay. Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. The first is following up on that. This is something that I haven't had any certainty on exactly how the taxation occurs. It is my understanding that you effectively pay a sales tax for consumption of electricity in the state of Wyoming, but I don't know the nuances of it. So I would like to understand that better. And if maybe this is for Brian in collaboration with you, understanding that with a little tiny one pager or half pager or something like that would be really useful to know which statutes govern that and exactly how it works for taxation with regard to a sales and use tax style taxation in the state of Wyoming, because I don't understand it. Maybe Brian can answer it right now, clarify it.
Mr. Chairman, it's 3915-103. I don't remember the exact, I think A1E. And there's a levied an excise tax. This is in the state sales tax upon the sales price paid to public utilities and to persons furnishing gas, electricity, or heat for domestic, industrial, or commercial consumption. So it's expressly contemplated. I think, there are various exceptions that or exemptions that may apply regarding, in certain, I think boiler fuel, for example, for producing electricity is one exemption from the sales tax. But that's the general statute that authorizes that. And
Mr. Chairman, so just to be perfectly clear, so it is a sales tax. That is the correct term for it.
and Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I actually just pulled up my electric bill, and there's a line item for state sales tax.
Perfect. That's the authoritative answer right there. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have another question, if I may.
Well, go ahead with your questions.
Thank you. All right, so we're looking at a bill right now that is specific to EVs and electrical charging stations. We did one a number of years ago that was the natural gas, compressed natural gas that we actually see there in Romanet 7 with a little bit of a change. I don't have the rest of the statute in front of me, but it occurs to me that it wouldn't be a bad idea to make sure that we've got hydrogen covered if hydrogen needs to be covered. So should we be having a Romanet 11 here that simply mirrors the language of 7 and says that you don't have to permit a hydrogen fueling station either?
Chairman Anderson, Senator Office. My understanding is that we regulate gas utilities, natural gas. That gets to be a tougher question when you try to figure out what gas is. The research I've done in the past, I haven't run across the fact that hydrogen is a type of gas that we do regulate, but I'm not going to say with certainty today that that's the fact. And if given the opportunity, we could look more closely into that and get back to LSO and answer that question.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if we do work this bill in the upcoming session, if we support it and kick it out of committee, I think it would be great for us to know one way or another whether we should be including hydrogen, so we just don't have to run the bill again next year. That would be great. Thank you.
When Chairman Greer and I looked at this, we were told that hydrogen was not covered by the PSC. So we wrote it just for electricity. But like you say, if we find out we have to, we need to run that in with a paragraph 11. But I don't think we're going to find it does.
Good.
Chairman Anderson, and I'd be more than happy to clarify that, but my research never ran across including hydrogen as the natural gas that we regulate at the Public Service Commission, and I have done a little research on that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Other questions? Other questions? There's Representative Western back. We're glad to see him back. He missed quite a few votes.
I wonder how he would have voted on that.
I don't know. He sure got that one. I know how he did vote. He voted no. Okay. No other questions? Thank you, Mr. Burridge. Burbridge, excuse me.
That's fine. It's a tongue twister for me as well. Chairman Anderson. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment on electric charging stations? In the massive amount of people in the room? Anyone in Zoom that wants to talk about electric charging stations?
Mr. Chairman, Director Reiner has his hand up. I'm not sure if he means to comment on this or not, but we're admitting him now.
Thanks. I'm gonna guess he cares about the next one.
Well, let's let him speak. Maybe he didn't
Hey,
charge right on, General.
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director of YDOT. Mr. Chairman, I did want to just jump in here and just maybe fill in a couple gaps. One is we are decisively engaged as we speak in working on an EV implementation plan. Really, that was sort of accelerated based on $5 million in this bipartisan infrastructure law that's coming at us. And we should have a draft of that early in February. Also, really have talked to the chairman of the Transportation and Military Affairs Committee about, hitting this topic hard in the interim in preparation for next session. However, in regards to the bill that's in front of you today, I certainly see it as an important piece of legislation to set the conditions for us to work, other statutes. And I do see this as an important statute change to start us down the road on this, installation of electrical vehicle charging stations, and would stand for any questions based on that.
Does anybody have any questions for Director Reiner? Any questions? No questions. Thank you, Director
You bet.
Reiner,
Thank you,
for
Mr.
the
Chairman.
update. No one else in the Zoom, no one else in the room. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Who is that? Heiner moves and Sherwood seconds. Any comments on the bill? Comments on the bill? Shall we work it page by page? No? How about 1, 2, 3?
Question.
It's such a good bill. I did a good job on that one. Yeah, I really did a good job. Let's do a roll call. That's in order.
Senator Beitman,
Excused.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger,
Excused.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
Aye.
Representative Duncan,
Hi.
Representative Air,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
No.
Representative Heiner,
Aye.
Representative Sherwood, Representative Western,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Greer,
Excused.
Chairman Anderson.
Aye.
That passes.
That passed. We'll probably take that in the Senate because it's an easy one. All right. Moving right along to Aeronautics update. Oh, yes,
It's a good idea.
a break.
We're behind schedule.
We're behind
Very
schedule.
close. We're very close.
We're very close to schedule, but let's take a break till 4 o'clock. 10-minute break. All right.
Thank you.
Called at fracas. Melissa, mobile.
Calling Defertus Melissa, mobile.
Hey, Director, your sound is on Zoom.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Pull it out, and push it back in, I think. Oh, it started. Hello, hello. We're ready to start working here again for that short break. We're now on YDOT Aeronautics update. And I'm going to ask the director to kind of brief us on that update. I've seen that about 3 times now. And so maybe we could go through that pretty quickly and make up our time on that one. So is Director Reiner ready to go on this? Let's see if he can brief it pretty quickly.
Mr. Chairman,
Kind of like
this is
an attack, you know, kind of a brief attack.
Mr. Chairman, this is the director, as you wish. So for the record, Luke Reiner, Director of YDOT. So here's the brief discussion on opening comments. One is, hey, we had a great construction season last year and are prepping for this year. You probably heard about $100 million more in the bipartisan infrastructure law, still working through details on how that will all come about and how we work through state portions of that budget. We're decisively engaged in partnering with different agencies around the state in terms of use of the right-of-way, and that's both with broadband and off-road vehicles. We're working hard on a zero emission plan, so that's both EV and hydrogen, and also continuing to work on autonomous vehicles. And our biggest challenge today is on recruiting and retention, which is not the first time that you've heard that. Mr. Chairman, that's a quick update on the hot rocks in YDOT as of today. And with that, unless you have specific questions on that, I will pass the mic to Mr. Brian Olson, our Aeronautics Administrator, to update you on the aeronautics portion of this brief.
All right. Do we have any questions for Director Reiner? Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none, go ahead, Mr. Brian Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I guess it's okay.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, committee members. For the record, as Director Reiner indicated, I'm Brian Olson, the Aeronautics Administrator for YDOT. We will quickly move through the slide deck that you have, Mr. Chairman, and then maybe I'll provide just a couple of brief comments at the end with your permission.
Brief is good.
Good. So moving on through the slide deck, slide number 2 is just the topics that we're going to cover. Slide number 3 is our total state passenger levels, a historical trend. I would note that we had a record 2019 pre-pandemic, and then you see the big drop off for 2020 during the pandemic. I do expect 2021 to be somewhere around our 2019 numbers, which is a good recovery. Moving on to slide number 4. This is just the percent change in employments, looking at 2019 versus 2020. And really the key takeaway is that Wyoming lost the least number of passengers relative to 2019 by percentage. Slide number 5. This is just our total state passenger levels for the calendar year. You'll note that most of the airports lost a significant number of passengers in 2020. 2 airports were held steady or even up a bit. That was Riverton and Sheridan. As you may recall, we moved those into the capacity purchase agreement in January of 2020. And so you see the results of that. Moving on to slide 6, some trends of 2021, high level markets that favor leisure customers tended to do well in 2021 versus those that are more business oriented. The result of that is that the yields and average fares have dropped, which is making the financial environment for the airlines difficult. And then Wyoming markets that are dependent on business traffic will struggle to expand their service. Moving on to slide number 7. This slide is just really another visual look at where our passengers are coming through, as far as the airports go. And it's just another look at that. Moving on to slide number 8. This is for the first 6 months of the calendar year. So 2021 versus 2019. And I would note that 2019 is what we would consider a normal year. So just a look at how those first 6 months were from a percentage change standpoint. Moving on to slide number 9. A few more details on booking trends that we were seeing through the first part of the year. And actually they've continued throughout the rest of the year too. As I indicated earlier, our leisure traffic was doing very well and continued to do fairly well, although it did drop off more rapidly in the September timeframe than we normally see. Corporate and business traffic is still down, and the industry is expecting 2023, 2024 before we get back to 2019 levels. And then at the bottom, just some originating and visiting traffic numbers relative to pre-pandemic levels. Slide number 10 is just some post-COVID-19 impacts, although we're probably still moving out of the COVID-19 impacts. It may take longer than we anticipated. As I indicate there, 76 seat and larger regional jets have gained some popularity. They have higher opportunity costs, and so the airlines are putting them where they'll make the most money. Also, I would note the operating costs are even more important now than they were pre-pandemic, which is benefiting the ultra low cost carriers such as Allegiant and Frontier Airlines. A little bit on the capacity purchase agreement. Cost savings was one of the big goals of the CPA, but another goal was just to have a backstop for retaining commercial air service in a volatile travel environment. And I would say that the capacity purchase agreement performed very, very well during the pandemic. We've seen a number of both routes and even communities lose air service, up to 40 routes and communities so far. And I do expect there will be more. So some really good news that the CPA helped us out with during the pandemic. The next few slides are just our air service enhancement program and our capacity purchase agreement program projects for fiscal year 21. I won't spend much time on those. Those tables are in our report as well. So moving through slides 11 and 12 to 13. A few CPA highlights for the capacity purchase agreement. We retained service from during the entire COVID-19 situation in 2020 and through spring of 2021. We really worked very closely with the communities and the airlines to match capacity to demand to do the best we could. And it worked very, very well for that. As I indicated earlier, Sheridan and Riverton were the only two airports in the lower 48 to gain traffic in 2020, which is remarkable. And then in the summer of 2021, Sheridan and Riverton had record enplanements. And really that continued through the September timeframe. It did drop off fairly steeply, but still relative to previous years, those two markets have done very well. More on the capacity purchase agreement on slide 14. It is working as intended. These are just some numbers, more passengers for a lower cost, a big reduction in cost per passenger in Riverton and Sheridan. And those two markets are probably our best indicator of how well it's working.
We have a question here. Give us a second. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hope you're okay with us doing questions as we go rather than all at the end. So, the ASAP program, when it was first passed, and I was a hard no on this and still have major concerns on this, it was understood that Casper and Jackson were not going to be in it. And we predicted that, in fact, they would end up in it because of all of the demand that we were leaking from other communities, and that it was actually going to hurt the core airports that at that time were able to function on their own. So I really think that has played out. And I know in Casper, we're in the situation where basically the county came in and provided this huge grant to keep the airline from leaving. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because at the time of its passage, I thought it was pretty clear that everyone said, because we asked in this committee, we said, are Casper and Jackson, is it going to leak demand from those airports? And they said, no, that's not going to happen. They're not going to be on the program. And that did happen. And so I find that very concerning, and wanted to ask you a little bit about the history on that. Thank you.
Do you want to answer that?
You bet, Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray. So just to clarify the two programs, the Air Service Enhancement Program is the program that's been around for many years. And that program, its original intention was to grow air service in the state of Wyoming, to recruit airlines and grow our service. A number of years ago, in say the 2018 timeframe, we realized that there was a lot of industry headwinds, and that's when the capacity purchase agreement was envisioned. So the two programs work in conjunction. The capacity purchase agreement was really to maintain critical air service. In other words, air service that if it did not exist, that community would not have air service. Whereas the Air Service Enhancement Program, broadly speaking, is to for the routes that are above and beyond critical air service. So specific to Jackson is participating in the Air Service Enhancement Program, which is exactly what that program was intended for. Jackson has a number of flights, and so they take or they get a grant or a project from the state, and they put in their share, and it's to grow service to new destinations. Specific to the Casper, the Casper to Salt Lake route that you referenced, that route was challenged simply due to some industry headwinds that we've seen happen really the last few months, which is a shortage of staffing to fly the flights. So the airlines are having to decide which routes to continue because of the lack of staffing. And that was the big kicker on the Casper route. In addition, with COVID coming back in some form, there was concern that the load factors would be low enough that they would need a minimum revenue guarantee. So hopefully that provides a little bit of background between the two programs and their intentions.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I thought ASAP originally was going to be phased out. It was funded that last year, and I thought the intent was to phase out, but I have to go back and listen to audio on that. But on the capacity purchase agreement, on the Casper situation, so my understanding was the county kicked in a six-figure sum to sort of convince the airline to continue the route. So was it that they were receiving these funds, so they decided that they would eliminate another route, that they were making enough off that route because of the subsidy to eliminate another one across the country due to staffing concerns? Is that an accurate characterization? And a second follow-up is there no intent to put Casper in or any other additions to the capacity purchase agreement?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, so on the first part of your question specific to the Casper route, I cannot speak for the airline. I don't know exactly what what their decision-making process is. I would just note that they're severely limited in what they can fly because of their staffing. And so they're just going through and trying to, they were going through and trying to figure out what routes would need to be cut. And they opened up the opportunity to the community to provide a minimum revenue guarantee. So the community match is 60% and the state match is 40%. And that is not through the capacity purchase agreement. That is through the Air Service Enhancement Program. As far as your second question, I believe it was regarding if there would be communities coming into the capacity purchase agreement. And for the type of service that we just discussed, like the Casper route, that will not be part of the capacity purchase agreement. That is part of the Air Service Enhancement Program. So the capacity purchase agreement is for the 4 communities: Sheridan, Riverton, Rock Springs, and Gillette. And that's who's currently in it today. As far as what the future holds, another similar type service at another community. So for instance, just a theoretical, if one of our other communities lost the essential air service support that they get from the federal government, there may be an opportunity if the type of service fit well with the airline and the communities that are in the capacity purchase agreement. So hopefully that answers your 2 questions.
Okay, yeah, go ahead with your presentation, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For slide 15, on the capacity purchase agreement, the CARES Act, we did receive some money through the governor's office for the time frame from March 2020 to December 2020 to offset about 67% of the costs, which we calculated to be relative to COVID. And we did return about 1.3 million to the state. The next couple slides, slides 16 and 17, are a couple of terminal projects that we've wrapped up. And really the intent of these slides is to provide some context for what we're doing on the capital improvement side. So as we're working on air service, we're also making sure that the infrastructure at the commercial service airports is adequate for the type of aircraft that's flying in there and the people that have to go through TSA. So both of these next airports, the Laramie Airport and the Sheridan Airport, their terminals were designed, far before TSA had equipment in the secure area and before we really even had secure areas. So they needed to be reconstructed and rehabilitated. So the Laramie terminal is complete, and the secure area will hold well over 100 people. The previous secure area would hold 33. So with a 50-seat aircraft, they had to actually start letting people get on the plane while they were still running people through security. Same story on slide 17 with the Sheridan terminal. They had a very space restricted secure area that would hold a little over 30 folks. And with a 50-seat aircraft, that's problematic. They did design both of these terminals to handle up to like 100 folks, so that as we see growth in the future and we have 75-seat aircraft, it'll take care of those needs. Slide 18, the Rock Springs terminal is being rehabilitated and expanded, and that project just kicked off recently and is ongoing. And then on slide 19, Mr. Chairman, it's just a few projects that significant projects that we're either in the middle of or wrapping up. And I'd be happy to answer questions on those. And then if there's no other questions, Mr. Chairman, on the slide deck, I can proceed with my comments, but maybe I'll pause there.
One question, you don't have the Cheyenne terminal in there. Is there some reason that you don't have it in there?
Mr. Chairman, we completed that before the look back I did on this. It was completed, probably 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. So I just did the ones that were either just finishing or in the middle of. But the Cheyenne terminal.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Representative Gray, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you,
Oh.
Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. So how much cash do we have in the capacity purchase agreement? I think that appropriation was 10 million, if my memory, I'm just going back to the bill in 2018. And the thought was that, is 15 is where it ended up. The thought was, I thought that was going to last, I think 10 years. It was going to be a 1.5 million a year. How much cash is in the program right now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. So the intent was to get that $15 million to last 10 years. I would say that the COVID-19 pandemic made that extraordinarily challenging. We'll see, how the next few years go. But there's currently a little over 12 million in there. So we have done remarkably well for the challenges we've had the last 2 years in stretching that money, and we'll continue to do that.
Other questions for Mr. Olson? Other questions? No other questions on the Sheridan Airport and what they did there, I guess. You want to go ahead there, Mr. Olson?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a few comments and a little bit about the state of the industry. A lot's happened in the last few months. I'm sure you've all read the news and watched what's going on with the industry, but the airline industry continues to struggle. I don't have fourth quarter numbers because they've just started reporting those, but the third quarter numbers from last year, they had pre-tax losses of about 1.2 billion. And their year-to-date losses at the end of the third quarter, if you exclude the payroll support funds, was about $18 billion. So they're still struggling. And I do expect that with business fares down and the business traffic, continuing to not rebound at the rate that they expected, that they'll continue to struggle for the next few years, especially the legacy carriers that carry a lot of business traffic. The second item is just really some crew resource issues. So I'm sure you've been reading the news. We had a pilot shortage pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, a lot of more senior pilots retired so that younger pilots could, keep their jobs. And as we're coming out of the pandemic, I should say that what the airlines are experiencing is just a real shortage of crew that can fly their aircraft, that can maintain their aircraft. Since Christmas time, we've had well over 25,000 flights canceled. So it's been very, very disruptive. It's particularly acute for the regional carriers. So the mainline carriers, they've had lots of cancellations, but the regionals have suffered quite a bit as well. I do expect that issue to continue for at least the next 12 to 18 months. Just not all the cancellations, but just the shortage of staffing and crew resource issues. So it'll be interesting as we move through these next few months. Due to that issue that I just indicated, there's been a lot of service that's been cut back across the country. I indicated earlier that there's been up to 40 routes and communities, and I do expect significantly more routes and communities to suffer, either to have their air service, a portion of it shrunk or taken away, or I do expect some communities to even lose all of their air service. So with that, Mr. Chairman, some significant challenges, but we're working hard to meet the challenges, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Olson? Any questions? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. In the Cheyenne situation, so I just want a little more narrative on it. It's $78 a person, the state cost per passenger, which seemed like the average is about 15 to 20. So that's about quadruple the amount. And then also the narrative on, I think the intent was for it to be this Dallas route. And it just appears from your narrative that they've done this Denver route that just to keep it going. And I think there's always been a lot of questions on the Denver route. One, what the demand is for it when it's right, it's 50 minutes away. So can you provide a little more narrative on the Cheyenne situation, the cost being high? I thought I saw another headline too, that the local dollar match, that there was something beyond that the city council put in, but I could be wrong on that. I thought it was more than 351,000, which is what's stated in the narrative. So I think there are 3 or 4 questions in there. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray, yeah, I'll be happy to talk a little bit about Cheyenne. So at the beginning of the pandemic, there was some service to Dallas, and due to both the pandemic and some crew resource issues that American Airlines was having, they stopped that service. So the numbers that you're referring to on slide 11, that service was a very brief service. It was really the start of trying to build back the market to fly to Denver. And so as far as the $78 per passenger, I would expect that number to decrease as the service hits its stride and we continue to bring people into flying that. The service was stopped on April 14th. It was originally would have gone all summer, but we had the major runway reconstruction project in Cheyenne. So due to that runway being closed and shortened, we had to stop the service to Denver. So the service has started back up. It started the first part of November. It's actually performing fairly well relative to other markets like it, especially for being so new. As far as your question regarding will it be successful, there's a pretty good market size in the Cheyenne area, so it has a lot of potential. It's hard to proxy it because it is fairly close to Denver. I would say that the closest proxy is probably Colorado Springs. Now, obviously, they have a significantly larger market. However, they have like 10 to 15 flights a day between Colorado Springs and Denver on 737 size aircraft. So there is a lot of potential there. It's been fairly well received by the community. And so I think that we'll work really hard to bring that cost down and make it more reasonable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've always been fascinated by this Cheyenne to Denver route. And what is the average ticket cost for that approximately? And what percentage of capacity is typically filled on that route? And what's the audience for that route?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, the average ticket price, so a walk-up leisure fare, so, book 2 weeks out, somebody that's planning ahead, it would be, in the neighborhood of $90 round trip, $90 to $100 round trip. As far as, who the demographics that are flying it, we are seeing a fair bit of business travelers. Obviously, they really like it. Denver's an omnidirectional hub. It goes all over the United States. It has tons of nonstops. So there's a fair number of business travelers flying that. And then surprisingly, we're seeing quite a few leisure travelers that maybe for whatever reason don't want to put up with the drive to Denver. So maybe they're flying to their second home in Phoenix or Vegas or wherever. And so we're seeing a fair number of those as well. As far as the load factors go, the load factors are ranging in the 55 to say 59% range. And I do expect those to climb a bit as we move into the spring and summer. So pretty good load factors. They're comparable to, say, our Rock Springs and Riverton market.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one other thing too, in marketing this route, just to suggest, and I'm sure you thought of it, but the parking at DIA, I mean, it's just outrageous. I was talking to Representative Duncan about it. I mean, I think it was like $35 a day. I know there's park and ride, but it's outrageous. So.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Olson? Any other questions for Mr. Olson?
I have one.
You have a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question. And I could easily look it up, but as marketing, as Representative Gray is doing, how many flights are currently going out of Cheyenne, if you know? Because I know I personally fly out of Scottsbluff. Shame on me, but it's only 35 miles. But when I can't go that way, I do go out of Cheyenne. And It's convenient, it's cheaper, and it's very convenient versus driving 3 hours one way each direction, and the parking and the gas and the direction. So it's much cheaper to go out of Cheyenne. So how many flights? Because I know in Scottsbluff, there's only 2. So how many flights a day is it that we're having go out of Cheyenne?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan. We were running at 2 flights a day up until the end of the year. And it's currently down to 1 flight a day for several months. These are some of our slowest months in the year. So just to conserve money and make the dollar stretch as far as we could, we brought those flights down to 1 flight a day. It's the overnight flight. It leaves early in the morning, returns fairly late in the evening. Somewhere around March, maybe first part of March, mid-March, that flight will come back. So we'll have 2 flights a day, and it'll be very similar to Scottsbluff or other similar sized communities. And we are hopeful that those will be good times to book tickets, and completely agree with all of your points about cost and hassle. And having used the service a number of times, it's very nice to fly into Cheyenne and not be arriving at Denver at 9 p.m. and facing that, getting your car and driving all the way up to Cheyenne. So.
Any other questions for Mr. Olson? Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Olson. Thank you for being with us today. I have Sean Burke, Air Service Program Manager.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Are you out there, Sean? Oh.
Mr. Chairman, no, Sean is
names, but
Mr. Chairman, Sean is the manager for Air Service Development at Denver International now. So we miss him very, very much, but he's doing great things for Denver.
So he's not going to talk to us then. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Olson? He's through talking to us. All right. Well, good. Any other public comment? Anybody else want to talk to us that hasn't moved to Denver yet? Anybody in the room? Anybody in Zoom? No? Okay, we're done. Public comment is closed. What's your pleasure? There's no bill. Would you like to have some kind of a vote anyway?
Sure.
A roll call vote of some sort? Yeah. Yeah, fly Wyoming. Yeah. We'll move right on to Office of State Lands, and we're right on schedule. And keep us on schedule if you would, Office of State Lands and sage grouse mitigation update quickly.
Finally eliminated all the sage grouse.
Yeah, we eliminated them.
And the audience.
Yeah.
They're like there.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I am. Oh, yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, I'm Jennifer Scoggin. I'm the Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. I believe Deputy Director Crowder is on the Zoom somewhere if he could get in. But I've also brought with me my friends today, Bob Budd, who's the Director of the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust, and Angie Bruce. She's Deputy Director of Wyoming Game and Fish Department. As you know, this is a multifaceted program with several state agencies. And so I wanted to bring the crew in case you all had specific questions that I could not answer. I did provide a high-level report on the Sage Grouse Mitigation Bank program. So you all can kind of just briefly see from a high level where things stand. But just to kind of orient us, during the 2020 budget session, the Wyoming legislature adopted Enrolled Act number 86 into the session laws of 2020. The Wyoming Greater Sage Grouse Compensation Mitigation Act is now codified in Wyoming Statute 9-19, beginning at 201. The effective date of that legislation was October 1st of 2020. As directed by the legislation, the State Board of Land Commissioners initiated the regular rulemaking process in consultation with the Wyoming Department of Ag, DEQ, Game and Fish, OGCC, WYDOT, and the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resources Trust. The rules that we came up with incorporate the provisions of Executive Order 2019-3, the Greater Sage Grouse Compensatory Mitigation Framework as developed by the Sage Grouse Implementation Team, federal agency guidance, public comments, and the requirements of the legislation. So you can see the rulemaking itself was kind of a heavy lift, trying to get all the stakeholders' input there. The program today, as I mentioned, everything kind of went live October 1st of 2020. I think it was beginning of last year, 2021, January of 2020, end of January 2021 and February of 2021, we received our first sage grouse mitigation bank proposals. We have 3 now sort of in our shop that we are considering. What we call the CMOG, which is the Compensatory Mitigation Oversight Group, is reviewing those applications and kind of having some dialogue back and forth with the bank proponents. The CMOG is comprised of the Office of State Lands and Investments, the Game and Fish Department, Wyoming Department of Ag, the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust, and it also considers input from our federal partners, which include the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the CMOG also has authority to seek input from other applicable state, federal, and local agencies where appropriate. We also have one existing sage grouse mitigation bank previously certified and approved by Fish and Wildlife Service that is also ripe, I believe, for consideration and certification by the Board of Land Commissioners. As I mentioned, you'll see in the report that those bank proposals are in various states of review with the CMOG, and the status of each is shown in the report that you have been provided. So that's sort of it in a nutshell, kind of the history of it, challenges with the program. As you might imagine, we've had communications issues with that many interested parties, the bank proponents, as well as the 4 agencies. We've been trying to build this plane and fly it at the same time. It's a complicated task, but I think that we are on track. We have developed some new processes to help with the communication. We're now doing what we call a readiness review, in which we bring all the CMOG together and we sit down with the applicant. So all of the agencies can hear what's working, what's not, what still needs to be done, what they need to go back to the drawing board and do correctly, what's been done incorrectly, which helps facilitate so that we know where things stand. In the past, we were getting applicants that would come to OSLI because we're the gatekeeper, obviously, for the Board of Land Commissioners, and they'd say, hey, we're ready to go. Let's go to the final CMOG and onto the board. And then we check with Game and Fish, and oh, but there's still this and this and this. And so we know that there was some frustration going on there, but I think we've streamlined some of that process, and we're better, I think, as the CMOG group at communication. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield to Director Budd and/or Deputy Bruce to maybe provide you with some of their insight and input here.
Before you get away, Jennifer, would you tell me where Dempsey Ridge is and where Burger Ranch is?
Mr. Chairman, certainly. Dempsey Ridge, I believe we are still ironing out some of the last minute game and fish requirements. Perhaps Ms. Bruce can address that, but we're working with them to have a readiness review meeting with them on January the 24th so that we can all get on the same page again there. The Burger Ranch, we had a meeting with them. I believe it was just before the holidays. And so we have met with them and discussed with them some of the outstanding issues with their application, mainly I think with Game and Fish. And we still have some coordination due with our federal partners on that to make sure that those are going forward as well.
Thank you for that briefing. I'm a little simpler guy. I meant what's the location of the
Oh,
of the
okay. I'm
area.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Senator Anderson, Mr. Chairman, I misunderstood your question.
Yeah.
So perhaps Ms. Bruce could give you more information on that.
All right.
Do you want to help me out? Bob Burgers, since you wrote so well?
Mr. Chairman, Dempsey Ridge is in Lincoln County between Cokeville and Kemmer. Burger Ranch is in Carbon County, southwest of Saratoga.
Thank you. I'll do better with asking my questions.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
No, and Mr. Chairman, if I could add just a little detail to the director's comments. So the director mentioned that we're just getting really close to 2 of those crossing the finish line. And the Game and Fish is really comfortable where they're at. They're both really strong projects. And really what is left is just a minor details in their paperwork in order for them to document what they're trying to achieve. So biologically, which is where, my agency comes in and reviews the biological components, looking at, is there sage grouse using the property and is there sage grouse habitat on the property? It's pretty much as simple as that. And like I said, those 2 projects are really close. We had a third one submit their proposal just a few weeks ago, and we're just diving into it as well.
And Mr. Chairman, a couple thoughts. One is that it's been less than a year since these applications were submitted. And I think some of the frustration you may hear from people is that they were in process before this became a legislative issue and before we passed a law and then required rulemaking, which basically reset the clock. So if you really look at after this was all put in place and the work that we did over that interim period, it's been less than a year to review all of the biologicals, all of the financials. And every time you find something, you go back to the proponent to correct that. Well, I would tell you honestly that if you meet today, it will be 2 weeks before you can get back together. And so you're looking at half-month blocks of time. And we're equally as frustrated with that because we see the value of these. We see the intent. We don't question that. We want to certify the banks. That's our job and that's what we want to do. But I put that in context because I think some of these people started thinking about this right after the 2015 listing decision. They got into it in 2017 or 18. Then we changed the law and we changed the rules and how we do it. So I think that's important to realize. What Deputy Director Bruce was talking about are things like, as an example, the pandemic cost us a year. And we worked through that pandemic period to try and get these up to speed. But what happened then is you didn't have LEC counts. You didn't, if their last time that they did any kind of a habitat assessment was 2018, you don't have an update to that to say nothing's happened to the habitat. So when that restart really was a restart and you had to go back and retread a lot of ground that had been done before. And that's unfortunate, but it's a reality that we have. And as both of my colleagues have said, we're very close to getting 2 of them stood up, I believe. I'm excited about that. And I think that it's a good thing for the state of Wyoming. So
I have a question. How many of these conservation banks did we have before we legislated it? I mean, we already had sage grouse areas that we were conserving.
Mr.
How many
Chairman,
of those do we have?
Mr. Chairman, there was 1.
Only 1?
And that was sanctioned under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife when the sage grouse was a candidate species, which in 2015, it no longer became a candidate. So there was no mechanism at that point for a bank to be certified by U.S. Fish and Wildlife because they had no jurisdiction. And that's when the state stepped in and said, okay, we will take the same kind of restrictions in the case that the bird does get listed in the future. We want to be sure that it will meet the bar that the feds would lay out as a candidate species or a listed species. So the state picked up where all that left off. That was probably 2017. I'd have to check my records, but I believe 2017 is when we started down this road.
So with these 4, we'll only have 5 conservation areas spread across the state. 4? We have these 4 plus the one we had in the beginning.
No, that's included. There are only 4. There's Pathfinder, which was licensed under U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And then there's Berger and Dempsey Ridge and Upper Green is the other one that just was submitted. And I want to be sure that we clarify They are a conservation bank. They are a specific piece of ground as opposed to like a core area, which is a larger area that has multiple LECs. These are specifically set up to be a bank and sell credits on that bank.
So Sweetwater River is Pathfinder.
Correct.
Okay, I get it. Yes, Representative Duncan. Would you please ask a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, can you, and maybe you already said it in the presentation and I wasn't paying attention, but refresh my memory. When we set up these banks, I remember us talking about the potential of selling credits statewide versus selling credits only on their area. Where did we end up with that?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, the service area for all the banks in Wyoming is the state of Wyoming. Sage grouse are managed, and I'll let Deputy Director Bruce explain that. They're managed as a statewide species as opposed to what you're used to with deer or elk, which are herd units. So it's a statewide service area.
Any other questions? Any other questions? We can't let you off this easy. There's got to be a question. Come on.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, I guess they are, yeah.
I've got a short one. Just
Yeah.
what has the demand been as far as utilization of the credits? Have we really seen very much on the demand side?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I think you've all heard me say this many times before. The people in the industry out there have been unbelievably willing to meet the desired avoid first, minimize, and then compensate. The demand is not very good. The existing bank, I believe, I just had coffee with him yesterday, said they sold 20 credits last year. But that's because there's not the impact in the core areas that some people envisioned. And most of the credits are for seasonal disturbances. There are a handful, Angie, help me out. There's a handful that have been right-of-ways on highway projects, that sort of thing.
Mr. Chairman, exactly, Bob, that a lot of them are like unavoidable. And they're not just say loss of habitat that we're given a permission for, but the companies are still really working closely with us to find a way. They, I have been so impressed by everyone, especially oil and gas, really working with us to, follow the executive order and minimize that impact. So I think that's reflection in just not many credits being sold. But now and then there is something which can't be avoided no matter what we do. And so that we work with them to minimize their impact and then credits are sold.
Great, perfect. Exactly
Could be a reflection on our activity in the field also. We're a little bit down. We do have some rigs working, but we're a little bit down. So might be some reflection there too. Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? Come on. No, we're all ready to go, I guess. All right. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thanks for sticking around for the end of this. And is there any public comment in the room or in the Zoom? Room is a little bit vacant and Zoom is a little bit vacant. So we'll wrap this up. We'll close public comment and we'll say, now we need to get on a couple other subjects I wanted to get onto. Move to adjourn. It's been moved to adjourn. Well, yeah, we've got lots more to do. What do you got?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that before we move to adjourn, despite the fact that we all want to leave, that we make sure that staff has everything they need from us and perhaps review our actions taken.
Staff, is there anything more we could give you to do?
Mr. Chairman, I think the only item I think for follow-up would be with you and Chairman Greer to divide the bills for House and Senate. And then, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, the quick rundown, the committee voted to sponsor 22 LSO 200, the cease and transfer bill, 22 LSO 89, the voluntary assigned trust, 22 LSO 85, carbon dioxide liability. The committee tabled 22 LSO 174, nuclear reactor amendments. The committee failed to sponsor 22 LSO 83, the business ready communities amendments. The committee voted to sponsor 22 LSO 90, the challenged loan amendments. The committee failed to sponsor 22 LSO 91, the challenged loan fueling infrastructure amendments. The committee sponsored 22 LSO 201, the electric vehicle regulations of public utility. And then the committee voted to sponsor 22 LSO 84, local impact assistance payments.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. If there be no objection, we'll adjourn at 5 minutes to 5, right on schedule, just like we planned. All right.